Hello, I'm Nikki with Flourish Flower Farm, and I wanted to take a minute to explain the functionality of this flower succession planting spreadsheet that I created. First things first, start on this tab at the bottom called Read This First. It contains a lot of helpful information about how to use this spreadsheet, and you can refer back to these notes at any time. The very first thing that you want to do is immediately open and save a new copy of this spreadsheet. That way, you only make changes to one copy, leaving another copy in its original state. That way, if you accidentally delete formulas or other information, you always have an original to refer back to. This spreadsheet cannot be shared, distributed, or resold in any capacity. It is meant for your personal use and internal flower farming use only. We recommend only using this spreadsheet in Microsoft Excel versus Google Sheets or Numbers. And that is so that you can use the full functionality of the spreadsheet. We cannot guarantee that all of the functions, such as notes, will be available in other programs. All right, now let's get into it. So here we have the whole spreadsheet, and you'll notice that there are 50 flowers here down the side, varieties, bouquet ingredient categories, hardiness, days to maturity, number of stems per plant, and total number of plants this season. Then we move into the different successions. So anything that has a blue highlighted square, that means that it is a spot for you to input your own data. These dates right now are just placeholders. Any cell that has a triangle, on my computer, they're red, but they may be a different color on yours. That means there is a note attached to that cell. So a lot of these at the top have it, so that it just gives you a little bit more information about what that might mean. For example, days to maturity, that means that the crop is ready to harvest. Number of stems per plant, that's based on the peak harvest window over the course of the plant's lifetime. Number of plants this season, I find this really useful for seed and plug ordering. And then we get into the formulas for how these numbers are automatically generated. So once you enter your first and last frost dates in these cells, so for example, my last frost date may be April 28th. So I'll type that in, and just a note, always type it in month/date format. And then my last frost date, we'll say it's October 31st. So you'll notice that a lot of these dates down the columns have changed, and that's because the formula is already in the spreadsheet. So once you enter in your first and last frost dates, all of the numbers that are not blue will change, or I'm sorry, all of the dates within this spreadsheet will change. You can also type in here the number of plants that you want to plant for each succession. So let's say my first succession of ageratum, I want to plant 50 plants. So it automatically calculates that I will be able to harvest about 600 stems from that one succession. And then if I were to add in another 50 for my second succession, that gives me another 600 stems, but it also adds into this column right here so that I'm planting 100 ageratum plants this season. Now, another thing to note is these other cells that are highlighted blue are for you to fill in based on whether or not you can plant cold, hardy annuals outside in your climate. So if you're able to plant in the fall, just change the date to when you anticipate planting outside. So for me, let's say it's October 31st, and then it's going to change the other crops below it that can also be fall planted. And then you'll want to go across here. Oh, you'll also notice when I put in 1031, it automatically changed my seeding date to correspond. So that work is already done for you. For the second succession transplant date for cold hardy annuals, you're going to want to enter the date where you can plant outside in the field. So for me, that is usually mid-March. So you'll notice again, it changed my seeding date. And then it also changed the other cold hardy annuals to a March 15th date so that you don't have to go and enter them each time. The only one that I don't have auto-populating are anemone and ranunculus, because you typically plant those a little bit different times than the rest of the cold hardy annuals. So moving down the row, my second succession, we already talked about that. And then I'll explain in just a second why I skipped a third succession, but then you can enter the date for your final succession in this column. I have it set to auto-populate an additional 21 days from this second succession date, but you may want to change that based on your specific climate. So the reason that some of these crops do not have a third succession date, for example, Ami, is that in a lot of climates or environments, if I were to plant, try to get in 4 successions, they would overlap way, way too much. And I would typically not have, stem length would become an issue. I wouldn't have long enough stems because a third succession would then take this final one, which would then be a 4th succession. It would push it too far into early summer where it's a little bit too warm for those cold hardy flowers. So from my personal experience, the crops where I could only get 3 successions, I left this blank, even though the third succession is here in the final succession column. You may find that you're able to get in 4 successions. I would just say experiment, play around with it, and see what works for you in your climate. Don't be afraid to make this spreadsheet your own. Add in your variety names, add in different notes of what works for you. The only notes I've added in are things that I thought would be helpful to clarify about what varieties I'm basing the days to maturity on, if it's an annual variety versus a perennial variety, and things like that. You can also, change the dates if you want, change the number of plants. I would just recommend trying to get a feel for what's already in here before you change things too much. Thank you so much for purchasing this spreadsheet, and we wish you lots of success this growing season.